Hi, so in this video, we're going to break down punctuation, which is one of the trickiest and but the most predictable parts of the ACT English test. We'll walk through some of the most common punctuation marks that you'll see and the rules that you need to master. So let's dive in. Just a simple stat, about 15%, roughly 15% of the ACT English questions, they test punctuation. So that's nearly 1 out of every 7 questions, and this is enough to make a real difference in your score. So here we're going to cover commas, semicolons, colons, dashes, apostrophes, and then a few overall tips in the end. And I'll show you some patterns and traps and how to approach them very confidently. So let's start with commas, uh, which is the punctuation mark that most students overuse or underuse. There are 4 major scenarios where commas are tested, and so we'll try and hit each one of those. The first one is to separate the independent clauses with a fanboy's conjunction. I'll cover that one, what that is, in the next slide. And the second one is to set off non-essential clauses. The third is the most popular one, the most well-known one, which is to separate items in a list with this Oxford comma. And then lastly is right after introductory phrases. And so now let's just spend some time kind of walking through each one of these examples. So the first use case is when you're trying to separate independent clauses with fanboys. So an independent clause is a sentence that can stand on its own, and it's already a complete sentence on its own. It doesn't need any other words after it or before it to make it a full sentence. And so when you're trying to combine 2 independent clauses with a conjunction, this is where the comma comes in. And fanboys here stands for the conjunctions that this comma applies. So the conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. And so, as an example, there's a sentence here which says, I wanted to go to the movies, but my brother stayed home. So I wanted to go to the movies is already a complete sentence on its own. My brother stayed home is already a complete sentence on its own. So these are the independent clauses. The conjunction that combines them is this but. However, the proper way to actually combine this with this conjunction is to have a comma before the word but. Again, same example here with the conjunction so. She studied all night, so she was exhausted in the morning. Here, she studied all night is an independent clause. She was exhausted in the morning is an independent clause that we're trying to combine with this word so. And so the comma here goes before the conjunction, and this is the right way to actually do it. So these small comma choices, they often make a difference between a correct and incorrect answer. So please always test if you've got 2 full ideas, and if so, then you need to use the comma if there is a conjunction that is combining them, if there's a fanboy conjunction that is combining them. So now let's look at the second use case, which is setting off non-essential clauses. A non-essential clause, these are just clauses or parts of a sentence that give extra information, but they can be removed without changing the main idea. And what we usually do is we usually separate them with a comma. So we set them off by separating them off with commas. And the primary tip here is that if the sentence still makes complete sense without the clause, then it's non-essential, and it should be set off. So let's look at a few examples. And please watch how the meaning holds without the middle part, right? My brother, who lives in Texas, is visiting us this weekend. Who lives in Texas here is not essential. The sentence could still be as well complete by just saying my brother is visiting us is visiting us this weekend. So this who lives in Texas is adding extra information, and so the way we use commas here is to set that off to just show that it's adding extra information. And so compare that to something like the student who studies hard will succeed. That who clause is essential, and there's no commas that are needed. So if you have a sentence that's like, the student who studies hard will succeed, the student is not a complete sentence, right? So this, sorry. the student studies hard will succeed does not make any sense. And so it doesn't make sense to set off the who clause, because in that sense it's actually necessary for it to be a sentence in the first place. Otherwise, it's not going to make any sense. So that's that for non-essential clauses. The third application, which is the most popular one, the most well-known one, is the for lists. So in a list of 3 or more, the ACT prefers that the so-called Oxford comma, and that's the one that's before the words and or before the word or in your list. And the goal is to remove ambiguity and also add clarity. And so, as an example here, uh, one of the sentences is, he left money to his parents, Oprah Winfrey, and The Rock. So this sentence on its own could be correct, but that's not the original intention of the sentence. The intention was, he left the money to his parents, Oprah Winfrey, comma, and The Rock. And another simple example is, I packed pencils, erasers, and my calculator. So here is where we see the Oxford comma rule, where if you're combining items in a list, there should be a comma that comes before the word and. Similarly here, we studied math, science, and English. Again, there should be a comma before and for this to be correct. And the last use case of commas is after introductory phrases. And so if a sentence starts with a phrase that gives background or sets the context, we're supposed to put a comma before the main idea begins, right? As an example, the common starters of sentences is after, because, while, although. These are the words that come before, or like words or phrases that just set up the context for the main part of the sentence. So again, introductory phrase example here is, before the test, we reviewed all the rules. So before the test is actually just an introductory phrase. So that's supposed to be set off. Before the test, we reviewed the rules. In the morning, I usually review flashcards. Although he studied, he still struggled with punctuation. So if you can say a sentence with a pause, just try to say it in your head. If you can say a sentence with a pause, then it should be introduced with that introductory phrase, and then with a comma right after it. And so that's that for commas, the 4 use cases. Now we're going to shift to semicolons and colons. So now that we've mastered commas, let's just quickly go over colons and semicolons. These often they often show up as punctuation. These really often show up as punctuation choices in the ACT answer options. So the setup is that you're supposed to select, should you use a semicolon, should you use a colon in this case. So the primary idea is, semicolons, they join 2 closely related complete sentences or independent clauses, right? So in this case, for example, she was tired is a complete sentence. She hadn't slept in days is a complete sentence. But these 2 are related. And so the idea of a semicolon is to say, okay, we don't want to just have a period here, because yes, it's, we're going to, it's technically correct to have a period, but these 2 sentences are very closely related, and it makes sense for them to be read, right after the others. And so the semicolon is the application for that. For colons usually come after a complete sentence, and they introduce a list, an explanation, or a dramatic idea. So for example, here, he has 3 goals: to win, to learn, and to grow. So again, it's introducing a list. She knew what she had to do, study, practice, and stay focused. So this is really it for colons and semicolons. Semicolons join 2 closely related complete sentences. Colons, they're mostly for introducing lists or explanation, but they usually come after a complete sentence. So if you have a colon that is coming before an incomplete sentence, then that's a wrong use case for a colon. So next, we're going to go over dashes, which again are another punctuation mark that is, fairly regularly tested. Dashes are for interrupting or emphasizing, and think of them as these bold versions of parentheses or colons, right? Uh, you're supposed to use dashes to interrupt and to emphasize. So again, avoid overusing the very strong punctuation marks here. Uh, and just a few examples to make this concrete, right? We have these sentences, there's one thing you need to remember. Timing is everything, right? Dramatic or just kind of like setting it up. Uh, Again, it also depends on the context of the sentence that or the paragraph that you're reading this in. So context really matters, and that's why practicing with full practice test or just practice quizzes will show you the right use cases for these dashes specifically. Uh, and so that's dashes, right? Now we're going to go to apostrophes, and apostrophes, they usually show up a lot, and they're usually in contractions, which is when you're trying to shorten two words, or possession, when you're trying to show ownership of a thing, right? Yeah, usually ownership of a thing. And there are some common traps that the ACT here likes to use. So three primary use cases. Use an apostrophe to show singular possession, so ownership by a singular subject. So let's say this is the student's book, right? It belongs to one student. You can also use apostrophes for plural possession as well. So this is the student's lounge. So this lounge belongs to many, multiple students, all students. And then finally, the one that's actually pretty maybe fairly common and easily understood is this apostrophe is being used in contractions. So when you're trying to shorten words, right? It is, you shorten that with its. You are, you shorten that with like you and then apostrophe re. So your, right? Uh, so these are the three primary use cases of apostrophes: singular possession, plural possession, and apostrophes in contractions. Again, these are just more examples to illustrate this concept. So the dog's leash was on the floor. The apostrophe shows the ownership that the leash belongs to the dog. The teacher's lounge is down the hall. So this apostrophe here shows that the lounge belongs to the teachers. And again, it's going to rain today. This is to show that we are shortening the it is going to rain today, right? That's the appropriate usage of apostrophe for contraction. Uh, and so that's that for apostrophes. There's more examples that you would see in practice quizzes. Uh, and we've covered these essential punctuation quizzes. There's obviously more punctuations. There's exclamation marks. There is periods. But these are the ones that are most frequently tested and the kind of like mostly confusing ones, right? Commas, especially, apostrophes, dashes, colons, and semicolons. Uh, and so these are the ones that I had a hard time personally preparing for when I was taking the ACT. And so I thought it would be useful to have this first. And just some final tips here, right? When you're reading a passage, just read it with structure in mind. Like, know why the punctuation is being used and the context that it's being used in. And also, in addition to just already knowing all the correct way of using punctuation, it's also important to practice under time conditions, because sometimes when you're in a rush, that's when you actually, mess up or like trip up. And so it's good to be able to have, time yourself when you're doing these practice quizzes or practice tests, so that exactly, the pressure of being in a test, right? And take your time. Take as many punctuation quizzes as you can until you feel comfortable. And good luck with preparing. And just all the best. And again, practice, practice, practice uh, is the name of the game.